Anxiety and studies of coping with occupational stress resulting from work with dangerous prisoners in prison service officers. Main findings. Officers in the study group feel anxiety as a state stronger than officers in the reference group. Officers in the study group prefer the emotional-oriented style. Officers in the reference group prefer the task-oriented style and social diversion. State anxiety is a variable negatively explaining the task-oriented style in officers in the study. Trait anxiety is a variable explaining the emotional-oriented style in both the groups of officers, i.e. reference group and study group. Results of the study seem to suggest the need of psychological and psychotherapeutic support in the group of officers working with dangerous prisoners or periodic changes of their workplace. Risks faced by that professional group include direct risks posed by prisoners, emergency actions, aggressive behaviors of prisoners, situations of conflict among prisoners that require officers' response, and deviant behaviors of prisoners. A source of intense stress are the so-called prisoners' collective actions, i.e. prison riots. Among individuals imprisoned in organizational units of the prison service, a small percentage of the population comprises prisoners who should be isolated not only from the society but also from other prisoners. Prisoners posing a serious threat to the society or a serious threat to the security of a prison or remand center, commonly referred to as dangerous, are still a debatable topic in the penitentiary science. Prisoners categorized as the so-called dangerous are a category of prisoners that require and/or force into using special measures of caution, protection, and security. While analyzing contemporary problems of the penitentiary system, it can be observed that there has been an increase in the number of stressful situations in the work of prison personnel in the last few years. That is especially noticeable in prisoner-officer relations, i.e. in the highest risk groups that comprises, first of all, warders working with dangerous prisoners. Those situations include, among others, increasing threat of violence, aggression of prisoners both on the premises of penitentiary units and outside prison walls, threatening calls, terrorizing of family members, corruption proposals. As an inseparable element of work with dangerous prisoners, all the specified stress-inducing and other situations create many problems and become a source of occupational stress to those officers. Regrettably, fear and anxiety about health and life of one's own and those closest to one sometimes become impossible to overcome by officers, which results in their resignation from the job. In this study, work, occupational, or job stress is defined as the psychological discomfort or tension that results from exposure to stressors in the workplace environment. Sully stated that the Greeks, as usual, had a word for stress, it ponos, which means toil. The man fights to restore normalcy. Therefore, it is important to try and develop for oneself appropriate forms of releasing stress and its negative effects while functioning properly in stressful situations. Anxiety as a state is presented as a subjectively, consciously perceived feeling of apprehension and tension accompanied by activation of the autonomic nervous system. It is a complex emotional response comprising a subjective, non-specific feeling of tension and threat. In turn, anxiety as a trait is presented as a relatively constant pattern of acquired disposition to perceive objectively non-perilous situations as threatening and readiness to respond to them with inadequately intense anxiety. It is an individual, relatively constant disposition to respond with anxiety and perceive a situation as threatened. The aim of this study was to examine the intensity of anxiety as a state and as a trait experienced by officers working with dangerous prisoners and the manners of coping with stress they adopt. Methods. Participants. 40 officers, warders working with dangerous prisoners, the study group, and 60 officers of the security department not working with dangerous prisoners, the reference group, were studied. The intensity of experienced anxiety was assessed using the State Rate Anxiety Inventory, STAI, while styles of coping with stress were explored by means of the Coping Inventory for Stressful Situations, CISS. Measures. The STAI is a tool designed to examine anxiety understood as a transient and situation-determined state of an individual, as well as anxiety understood as a relatively constant personality trait. The STAI consists of two subscales, one that serves to measure anxiety as a state, and the other designed to measure anxiety as a trait. The CISS is meant for diagnosing styles of coping with stress. It contains statements concerning various behaviors that can be displayed by individuals in stressful situations. Scores are presented on three scales: task-oriented style, emotion-oriented style, and avoidance style. The latter can take two forms: distraction seeking and social diversion. Statistical analysis. The Mann-Whitney U test was used to examine intergroup differences and Kendall-Stowe correlation coefficient to examine relationships between the studied variables. Forward stepwise multiple regression was applied too. Results. It does not seem to be coincidental that anxiety felt by officers in the study group is more intense than anxiety felt by officers in the reference group. Direct contact and work with prisoners assigned the danger status is a stronger stressor and arouses a stronger feeling of threat. As a matter of fact, those officers are object of physical and verbal aggression of dangerous prisoners. It is worth noticing, however, that they significantly stronger feel state rather than trait anxiety, which means that anxiety felt stronger by officers in the study group is not a permanent psychophysical disposition but a state. It is a temporary response to an event, e.g. a threat made by a dangerous prisoner. When analyzing the rank order of styles of coping with stress, it can be observed that officers in both the groups prefer the avoidance style most. Second comes the task-oriented style, and last the emotion-oriented style. In the reference group, there are only slight differences between the task-oriented and avoidance styles. Different preferences with regard to social diversion and distraction seeking in our study may suggest that officers in the reference group cope with stress mainly through social diversion, hence using social support, while officers in the study group seek distractions such as thinking about other pleasant things, sleep, etc., while trying to somehow forget about a difficult issue or escape from it even for a short time. Irrespective, however, of the form, officers in both the groups cope with stress by adopting first and foremost the avoidance style. They avoid thinking about, being affected by, or experiencing a stressful situation. In other words, the avoidance style is a prevailing style of coping with stress in both the groups. When examining differences in adopted styles, it can be observed that officers in the reference group show stronger tendencies toward taking actions and making efforts aimed at solving a problem, e.g., through cognitive transformation or attempts at changing the situation that officers in the study group. Officers in the reference group also, to a larger degree, seek for social diversion, which may perform certain adaptive functions in the form of using social support. In turn, officers in the study group show stronger tendencies toward focusing on their own emotional experiences such as anger, tension, etc., which is aimed at reducing emotional tension that arises from a stressful situation. In the reference group, anxiety as a state and as a trait are associated with focusing on oneself and one's own unpleasant emotional experiences. On the other hand, state anxiety is associated with a tendency toward avoiding thinking about or experiencing a stressful situation, and in particular with distraction seeking, such as watching television, overeating, thinking about something pleasant, etc. In other words, state and trait anxiety makes officers in the reference group focus on their own emotional experiences in order to cope with a stressful situation, while state anxiety makes them try to avoid the stress through undertaking other, temporarily pleasant actions. In the study group, anxiety as a state and as a trait are negatively correlated with a tendency toward undertaking actions or tasks in order to solve a problem and avoiding the problem through social diversion, i.e., seeking for social support. That means that anxiety makes officers in the study group not undertake tasks and actions or the so-called interpersonal exchange in order to cope with stress. In turn, both types of anxiety are positively correlated with focusing on one's own unpleasant emotional experiences. In other words, anxiety as a temporary response and relatively constant disposition causes officers in the study group not to undertake actions and attempts to solve a problem and to avoid social diversion in order to solve a problem. Forward multiple regression confirmed a part of the relationship we revealed earlier in the correlation analysis. In the reference group, anxiety as a constant psychophysical disposition makes officers focus on their own unpleasant emotional experiences in order to reduce emotional tension connected with a stressful situation. In the study group, anxiety as a temporary emotional response makes officers not undertake actions aimed at solving a problem. On the other hand, anxiety as a relatively constant disposition makes them focus on their own emotional experiences in order to reduce emotional tension, which is actually similar to what is observed in officers in the reference group. An important issue is social diversion. Officers in the study group seek for social diversion less than officers in the reference group, and in their case, social diversion as a manner of coping with stress correlates negatively with anxiety as a temporary emotional response and constant disposition. According to some authors, that style may perform adaptive functions because individuals, e.g., officers in the reference group, use social support. On the other hand, avoiding that style by officers in the study group may be an attempt at protecting others, especially the close ones, against events or information that could burden or even overburden. Conclusions. Based on the above findings, one can state that the studied population of prison service officers working with dangerous prisoners differ significantly in the parameters of anxiety and styles of coping with stress from the group of officers not working with dangerous prisoners. Assessment of anxiety experiences indicated that officers in the study group feel anxiety as a state, it is a temporary emotional response, stronger than officers in the reference group. As for coping with stress, it was observed that officers in the study group prefer the emotional-oriented style more than officers in the reference group, while officers in the reference group prefer the task-oriented style and social diversion more. As for relationships between anxiety and styles of coping with stress, it was observed that state anxiety is variably negatively explaining the task-oriented style in officers in the study group, whereas trait anxiety is variably explaining the emotion-oriented style in both the groups of officers. Results of the studies seem to suggest the need for psychological and psychotherapeutic support in the group of officers working with dangerous prisoners or periodic changes of their workplace. Understanding the structure and intensiveness of anxiety as a trait experienced by officers working with dangerous prisoners and styles of coping with stress they adopt will allow for better psychological prevention and intervention methods as well as therapeutic efforts.